Imagine waking up one day and not knowing anything about your past, having dim memories of people, events, thoughts, but not really knowing what they all mean or how to stitch them together. I'm going to take you in a slightly different direction today, into the past. Because humanity, I believe, is today in this situation. If you don't know who you are, where you came from, if you don't know your past, how do you build a future? And we as a race, the human race today, is very tentative. There's not much we know about our past, who we are, where we came from, why we're here. How do we build our future then? And there are discoveries being made all the time, scientific discoveries, which are telling us exactly how little we know about our past. So a little over 15 years ago, when I started researching the Mahabharata and a lot of the other ancient Indian texts, I realized that there were two dangers present in this field of research into the past of humanity. The first is that there are a lot of experts out there. And we've seen this in science also. The progress of science has been slowed down time after time by people who say, this is not how it works. This is not the right way to do things. This idea is rubbish. It's not going to work. We all know that everyone believed the world was flat, right? We all know how Galileo was humiliated because he believed in the heliocentric solar system. That's the first danger. The second danger may be even more insidious. This comprises people who either through ignorance, lack of scholarship, or just pure evil motive, conjure up interpretations and tell you what they want you to believe. So they say, hang on, let me tell you what this means. So today, what I'm going to do before you is, I'm not here to recommend a theory, support a school of thought, or to rake up controversies. I'm just going to present you facts, and in connection with the theme of Join the Dots, I'm going to leave you to join the dots and come to your own conclusions. I want to start very quickly with this. One of the first things I came across was this verse, supposed verse from the Mahabharata, which is on thousands of websites around the world, which says, this proves that there were nuclear weapons in the Mahabharata. I've read the Mahabharata twice over, the entire Mahabharata, the 1 lakh shlok Mahabharata, and there is no real evidence for this. And I just want to show you this, without getting into the details. This is a very long compilation of verses. In the Mahabharata, typically you have 2-line shloks. And I just want to show you what this actually refers to. It's actually stitched together from different verses. So the middle verse, which is highlighted in red, actually is taken from 2 verses from the Masala Parva, chapter 1, which describes events that took place 36 years after the Kurukshetra war. And it talks about an iron thunderbolt and a messenger of death, but it's not in reference to a nuclear weapon. The last 2 paragraphs of this so-called verse are taken from the Masala Parva, chapter 2. And in this case, there are 4 different shloks which actually talk about how the Vrishnis were, during the war, the Vrishnis and the Andhakas, how their destruction was wrought. And the first one, which is supposed to describe the explosion of a nuclear bomb, 10,000 suns and a blast of energy so bright, actually refers to the Karna Parva, chapter 34. This is the 8th book of the Mahabharata. And in this, in the 3 verses, the 3 shloks here, it's actually talking about Shiva in his form of Mahadev, who is leading the war against the Asuras. There are no nuclear weapons involved here at all. The flood myth. Was there really a global flood? 2,000 cultures around the world. There are 2,000 flood myths around the world, including our very own myth about Manu and the flood. And there's a lot of scientific evidence over the last decade or so that has shown that actually in about 10,800 BC, a comet or an asteroid hit the Earth, broke up into small fragments, and struck the Earth, the ice cap, at different points, which you can see in this image. Now, two things happened as a result of this asteroid strike, and there is geological and scientific evidence for this. The first is that the ice caps where it struck melted, and there was sea levels rose by quite a few meters, drowning most of the world and leading to the geography that you see today on Google Maps or Google Earth. The second thing that happened was that because of the impact, there was a lot of debris and dust thrown up into the atmosphere, and a 1,300-year-long artificial winter, which is called the impact winter, lasted. This also resulted in the extinction of a lot of animals. And just to show you a report on ice cores taken from Greenland, you can see the comet impact. Till about 15,000 years ago, there was a global warming. The ice age was ending, temperatures were rising, and then suddenly the temperature drops to ice age levels and stays there for about 1,300 years. When the dust and debris in the atmosphere settles down, temperatures return to where they are today. And that point where the temperatures suddenly plummet unnaturally, a return to the ice age is the point when the comet or the asteroid hit the Earth. The number 7 has a lot of very, very interesting similarities in cultures around the world. So the Mongols have the 7 old men. In Siberia, you descend to the underworld through 7 levels. The Vogul have the 7 sons of God. The Yakut have the 7 supreme gods. And in India, as you know, we have our 7 rishis, the Saptarishis. We have the 7 levels of Patal Lok. And interestingly, we have the 7 Adityas. Now, some of you may be saying, hang on, there are 12 Adityas. But in the Rig Veda, there were 7. Aditi gave birth to 8 sons. Markanda was unformed. His brother shaped him and made him the sun. There were 7 Adityas. Later on, that number became 12. In the Mahabharata, you read about 12 Adityas. But the number 7 is curious. In Mesopotamia, you have the legend of the Sebetu, the 7 sages who founded the key cities of Mesopotamia. If you go to the Bible, in the Old Testament, the number 7 again recurs. God created the world, according to Genesis, in 7 days. Noah of the ark fame, the flood, God gave him 7 days to get 7 pairs of clean animals and 7 pairs of birds on the ark before the flood broke. The story of Joseph and his multicolored coat, which is a popular Broadway musical, Joseph and the Pharaoh's dream. So the Pharaoh dreamt of 7 fat cows being devoured by 7 lean cows and 7 good ears of corn being eaten or swallowed by 7 meager ears of corn. So Joseph interpreted this dream as being 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. And the number 7 again. The story of Joshua and the city of Jericho, which actually is a historical city. Archaeological remains have been found going back about 8,000 years. And the story goes that Joshua was told to march for 7 days. Every day, march around the city for 7 days. 7 priests were blowing trumpets. On the 7th day, they marched 7 times around the city. The priests gave a shout. They gave a signal. The people shouted, and the walls of Jericho came tumbling down. The number 7, curious how it's there across so many cultures. This is just the tip of the iceberg, by the way. If you look at ancient metrology, whether you go to the UK, the megalithic yard, which is about 32.94 inches, you go to Mohenjo-daro, the 33-inch Indian guz, which was notified by the British later on. In Sumer, you have a relationship between the Indian guz and the Shusi. Greek, Roman, and even Saxon metrology was based on the Sumerian metrology. Iberia, Mexico, and Peru have the short yard, which is about 32.5 inches. And we're talking about 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. Celtic and Vedic traditions. I came across this when I was researching for my books. And this is very interesting because if you look at the Celtic side, you have the goddess Danu, who had a bunch of sons called the Tuha de Danan. And in India, in the Vedic tradition, in the Rig Veda and the Mahabharata, you have Danu, who is the wife of Kashyapa, and she has 40 sons who are the Danavs. In, in Celtic mythology, Dios means shining one. In Sanskrit, Deva means shining one. The Druids, who were the priests of the Celts, they believed in the transmigration of souls. They believed in memorizing knowledge and not writing it down. Fire pits were the center of all their rituals. They had bathing rituals before any rituals were conducted, and they worshipped the inverted oak tree. In India, we know that knowledge was memorized. All the ancient texts were memorized from time immemorial. They were not written down. The belief in the transmigration of souls is there in Vedic traditions as well. Fire pits are at the center of Vedic rituals. Ritual bathing is part of Vedic rituals. And finally, in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna talks about the inverted Ashwatha tree. The similarities are amazing. Ancient knowledge. So if you look at different texts, whether you look at the Srimad Bhagavatam or you look at some of the other texts, and I'm just quickly going through these quotes, the Brahma Samhita, but a lot in the Srimad Bhagavatam, you come across this reference to innumerable, unlimited universes. And one of the hot topics today, to which even Stephen Hawking has contributed, is the theory of multiverses, unlimited, numerous universes. How did people even guess at things like this thousands of years ago? In 2009, an amazing discovery was made in Siberia in a cave called Denisova. First, a small piece of a finger bone was found belonging to a young girl, which was dated to about 30 to 40,000 years ago. Later on, the dates were revised to about 60 to 70,000 years ago based on revised dating that was done. But interestingly, that bone and a tooth was found, and it was initially thought to belong to a large extinct animal, because this tooth, for example, is 2.5 times the size of a human tooth. It was only when DNA testing was done that it was realized this is a human tooth, and that was a human bone belonging to a species today called the Denisovans, who we did not know existed. Before 2009, we didn't know about them. But today, they are one of the hottest topics. We don't know much about them. Very little has been found about them, but one of the fantastic finds is this bracelet, or part of this bracelet. It was broken. And what's interesting about this is not the stone it was made from, which is another story by itself, but this small hole in the side of the bracelet. So you can see the hole here. This is magnified. If you read the scientific report that the scientists ran tests on this, they came to a very interesting conclusion. They said that this hole was made using a two-faced high-speed drill. Technology that was way ahead of its time. That technology was not seen till thousands of years later in the Neolithic age. We're talking about this happening 30 to 40,000 years ago. In 2004, and this is an amazingly well-kept secret, this site in Turkey called Göbekli Tepe was discovered. Very interesting site. It has been scientifically dated, and everyone agrees on this date, to about 9,500 to 10,000 BC, so about 12,000 years ago. A megalithic site with hundreds of these circular pits, these circular megalithic structures up there. And the interesting thing is that every level, they built these structures, then they buried them. Then they built another structure on top of those structures, buried those. They kept building and burying and building and burying, but why? There are mysterious symbols and animals carved into these stones. Interestingly, the archaeological excavations around the site have not revealed any signs of habitation. Cooking, living, eating, nothing. People were not living over there. The nearest water source was 3 miles away. And remember, we were hunter-gatherers at that point in time. We were not in organized societies like we are today. That started with the advent of agriculture. How did hunter-gatherers build something so far away and so technologically advanced? Because the astronomical alignments at Göbekli Tepe are mind-blowing. I don't have the time to go into them today, but if you Google it, you'll see. What were people doing, and who was building these monuments 12,000 years ago? And if you come to mythological parallels, this is the tablet found in Sumer in Mesopotamia, which describes the Babylonian flood story. And we have parallels across the world. Like I told you, 2,000, I'm just presenting 3. So the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is what I just showed you, that tablet, it talks about Utnapishtim, who was the survivor of the Babylonian flood. Gilgamesh goes and finds him, and he tells him the story. Utnapishtim tells him the story of the flood. In the Bible, you have Noah. In India, we've got the story of Manu. And I've also linked it back to some of the scientific evidence of a global flood about 12,000 years ago. Also, there are amazing parallels between the final journeys of some iconic figures in mythologies across the world. So in India, you have Yudhishthira's final journey. In Iran, you have Kai Khosrau's final journey. In Israel, you have Enoch's final journey. Enoch also was a great leader. He wrote the book of Enoch, which was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 1950s. And in Mexico, you have Quetzalcoatl's final journey. Now, the interesting thing about the final journey of all these gentlemen is that they all walked into heaven. They did not have to die to get to heaven. All of them. All of them went on this journey with people around them, and they told the people, go back. Do not come with us. And the people did not listen, and one by one, the people accompanying them died. You know the story of Yudhishthira, right? But it happens with all of them. In Yudhishthira's case, he was accompanied by a dog. In the case of Kai Khosrau, he was accompanied by an angel. In Quetzalcoatl's case, again, he was accompanied by a whole bunch of people. So it's really amazing. Where did these similarities come from? How are they so amazingly identical? So the thought that I want to leave you with today is this. We were told, or we were taught, I remember in my school textbooks, we were taught that human civilization started about 6,000 years ago with the great city-states of the Indus Valley, Sumer, and of course Egypt. With discoveries, archaeological and scientific discoveries over the last 10 to 15 years, this horizon of civilization has been pushed back to 10,000 BC. Göbekli Tepe is just one example that I've given you, which is where there's no controversy about the dating. Everyone agrees it was built about 12,000 years ago. Where did all of this come from? Is it possible that we believe that we are very different from each other, the different nationalities, the different people of the world? Is it possible that we are actually not as different as we think we are? Is it possible that there is actually a common origin where all these stories, these traditions come from? How else do you explain the similarities that you see across the world? That's the thought I want to leave you with today. Thank you.